Potter story from another's perspective. Rowan Barrows and the Forgotten Prophecy, Chapter 16, The Orb. Spring slipped quietly into exam season before Rowan and Margot ever found the chance to open the chest. A few nights after agreeing to help him, Margot had reluctantly joined Rowan on one final trip to the strange hidden room. Together they'd somehow managed to drag the heavy chest all the way back across Hogwarts in the early hours of the morning without being caught, which Rowan later realised probably should have worried him more. The only real disaster came halfway up the 4th floor staircase when the Grey Squire appeared seemingly from nowhere and immediately demanded to know what they were doing carrying a suspiciously cursed-looking box. Margot, without missing a beat, had informed him it was a top-secret Hufflepuff mission. The Grey Squire had gasped dramatically. Then Margot pointed a warning finger at him. "And absolutely no songs about what you saw." To Rowan's surprise, the ghost had looked genuinely offended. "Madam," he declared, hand pressed against his transparent chest, "I am capable of discretion." Now the chest sat hidden beneath Rowan's bed, beneath layers of blankets, old robes, and a very flattened jumper from home. Every so often, usually late at night when the dormitory had gone quiet, Rowan swore he could still hear it humming softly beneath the floorboards, waiting. Every time Rowan thought about the chest hidden beneath his bed, something else seemed to get in the way. Revision schedules pinned to common room walls, mountains of homework, late-night studying, and professors suddenly reminding first years that their futures apparently depended upon remembering the properties of moonstone dust. Even the whispers had grown quieter somehow. Instead, the days blurred together into ink-stained fingers, sleepless nights, and endless revision. Then, suddenly, exams arrived all at once. The Great Hall was transformed for written tests, long rows of desks stretching beneath the enchanted ceiling, while professors prowled between them like hunting cats. The scratching of quills filled the room from morning until evening. Some exams went far better than Rowan expected. Herbology was almost comforting. Professor Sprout guided them through the greenhouses, while they identified magical fungi and repotted snapping rootlings that tried enthusiastically to bite through their gloves. Rowan moved carefully between the trays of plants, soothed by the warmth and earthy smell of damp soil. When he successfully identified a frostbell sapling before anyone else, Professor Sprout beamed at him. "Excellent work, Mr. Barrows." The praise stayed with him for the rest of the day. Charms was chaotic in a completely different way. Professor Flitwick stood atop a tower of books while the first years attempted to perform the practical portion of the exam, enchanting a pineapple to tap dance across the desk. Around the classroom, pineapples staggered, rolled sideways, or simply exploded into showers of leaves. One Ravenclaw's caught fire briefly. Another somehow escaped entirely and had to be chased beneath the desks. Rowan bit back a laugh and focused carefully on the wand movement. His pineapple twitched, wobbled, then began tapping awkwardly across the table in uneven little steps. It wasn't graceful, but it danced. "Very good," Flitwick chirped as he passed. Transfiguration was terrifying. Professor McGonagall stalked silently between desks while students attempted to turn mice into snuff boxes. The classroom smelled faintly of fur, wood polish, and panic. Rowan stared down at his mouse, which stared back at him with deep personal disappointment. "Concentrate on the object's shape," McGonagall said sharply from somewhere behind him, "not merely its appearance." Rowan swallowed hard and lifted his wand. The mouse vanished in a puff of smoke, and reappeared as a snuff box covered in soft grey fur. A few students snickered nearby. Rowan's stomach sank. Then the lid snapped open and shut neatly. McGonagall paused beside him, inspecting it carefully. "The hinges function," she said after a moment. better than some. Then she moved on, which, from Professor McGonagall, felt remarkably close to encouragement. Astronomy left everyone half frozen. The students climbed the tower close to midnight wrapped in scarves and blankets, trying to chart constellations while their fingers slowly lost all feeling. Rowan nearly ruined an entire section after realising he'd labelled one star incorrectly, but managed to fix it before handing the chart in. Potions was worse, far worse. Professor Snape prowled between the cauldrons while the first years brewed forgetfulness potions in the dim dungeon classroom. The instructions looked simple enough, which usually meant disaster. Rowan measured every ingredient carefully, trying not to panic as Snape drifted silently past the desks like a particularly judgmental bat. The empty stool beside him felt strange without Ollie there. Normally Ollie would have been whispering unhelpful advice beside him, or somehow producing a perfect potion entirely through luck and confidence. Instead, Rowan worked alone. Not that Ollie seemed particularly upset about missing the exams. Professor Sprout had somehow managed to convince the other teachers, and apparently Professor Dumbledore himself, to allow Ollie to miss his first-year exams entirely while he recovered in the hospital wing. According to Sprout, his marks throughout the year had already proven he was perfectly capable academically. Ollie had looked unbearably smug upon hearing this. Ernie Macmillan, meanwhile, had nearly choked on his pumpkin juice. "That cannot possibly be fair," he declared loudly in the Great Hall. "The rest of us are suffering." Zachariah Smith had narrowed his eyes suspiciously across the table. "I'm just saying," he muttered. "This feels planned." "You think Ollie burned his own arm to avoid exams?" Rowan had asked. Zachariah shrugged. "Wouldn't put it past him." Honestly, neither would Rowan. Ollie himself had only grinned lazily from his hospital bed when Rowan told him about the accusations. "History will remember me as a genius," he'd said proudly. Though judging by the angry red burns still wrapped beneath layers of bandages, Rowan was fairly certain Ollie hadn't actually intended purely to avoid exams. Even now, though, the dungeon classroom felt quieter without him there. He added the porcupine quills, his potion hissed violently, and suddenly began smoking an alarming shade of yellow. Snape appeared beside him instantly. "Mr. Barrows," he said softly, peering into the cauldron with clear disappointment, "unless your intention was to make the drinker forget their own existence entirely, I suggest you lower the heat." A few Ravenclaws laughed. Rowan muttered a quick apology and adjusted the flame, cheeks burning. Thankfully, after several frantic corrections, the potion settled into the proper silvery blue colour. Not excellent, but acceptable. And acceptable was enough. Defence against the dark arts was strange as always, with Professor Quirrell sneezing nervously through half the written paper, while students answered questions about red caps and common curses. Afterward, Justin claimed he'd accidentally described a red cap incorrectly. "Honestly," he said miserably as they left the classroom, "I think I invented an entirely new creature." History of magic nearly killed half the class through boredom alone. Even Ernie Macmillan had looked close to unconscious by the end. Students wandered the corridors clutching notes they no longer needed, muttering facts under their breath out of pure habit. The castle itself seemed exhausted. Every evening Rowan visited the hospital wing after revision, and every evening Ollie complained dramatically about missing exams, as though Madame Pumphrey herself had personally ruined his academic career. "I would have been brilliant at charms," he insisted one night while Madame Pumphrey changed the bandages on his arm. "Natural talent." Despite everything, Rowan found himself smiling, because the hospital wing still felt quieter than normal, without Ollie causing chaos everywhere else in the castle. The evening after the final exam, Rowan sat alone beside the lake watching sunlight ripple softly across the water. He thought he'd done all right. Not brilliantly, not terribly either. Enough to pass, enough to make it to second year. And for the first time in days, he finally allowed himself to breathe. Unfortunately, the moment he stopped worrying about exams, something else immediately crept back in to fill the silence. The chest. Late one night, the Hufflepuff common room had long since emptied. The fire had burned low behind the grate, casting soft amber light across the round walls while rain whispered gently against the high windows. Shadows flickered lazily across the ceiling beams, and somewhere deeper in the castle, the old pipes groaned softly through the walls. Rowan sat alone near the hearth with his guitar resting across his lap. He wasn't really playing properly anymore, just loose, wandering notes drifting quietly through the empty room, while his thoughts spiralled elsewhere, toward the forest, toward the chest hidden upstairs beneath layers of blankets and clothes under his bed, toward the growing feeling that once he opened it, something would change. The fire cracked softly. Then, "That's new." Rowan looked up. Margot stood halfway down the staircase. Her hair still looked slightly untidy from sleep, though her expression had already returned to its usual sharp calmness. Rowan lowered the guitar slightly. Couldn't sleep. Margot stepped closer. Couldn't or wouldn't. Bit of both. She sat cross-legged opposite him on the rug beside the fire while Rowan absent-mindedly adjusted one of the strings. "It's nice," she said eventually, nodding toward the guitar. "Sounds sad, though." "It's not supposed to." Margot tilted her head slightly. "Maybe you're just playing how you feel." Rowan looked away toward the fire. For a few moments neither of them spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The old clock near the barrel entrance ticked steadily onward. Eventually Margot glanced toward the staircase leading to the dormitories. "It's strange without Ollie here." Rowan's fingers stilled against the strings slightly. Usually the common room never stayed this quiet for long. Normally Ollie would have been sprawled across an armchair, interrupting every serious conversation with something ridiculous, probably loudly explaining why dragons were misunderstood while stealing food from someone else's plate. Now the room just felt emptier. Margot folded her arms loosely over her knees. He's going to be furious he missed this. That earned the faintest smile from Rowan. He'll never forgive us if we opened it without him. Probably. The smile faded again after a moment, because underneath the humour sat the truth neither of them were really saying aloud. Ollie would have come, even injured, even knowing it was dangerous, and somehow that made Rowan feel guiltier than before. Margot seemed to notice immediately. "You're doing that thing again," Rowan frowned slightly. "What thing?" "Thinking everything is your fault." The fire crackled between them. Rowan lowered his gaze toward the guitar resting in his lap. "I brought him into all this." "No," Margot said quietly. "Ollie launched himself into all this head first because he thought it sounded exciting. That was unfortunately true. He made his own choice." Rowan didn't answer. "Well," she said quietly, "if we're going to make terrible decisions, we should probably do it before I come to my senses." Despite everything, Rowan let out a quiet laugh. He carefully set the guitar aside and stood. Margot went ahead to collect her things before heading to the forest, whilst Rowan slowly made his way across the now empty common room toward the dormitory staircase to get the chest from under Rowan's bed. But before he made it to the stairs, "Are you okay, Rowan?" Rowan froze slightly at the sound of the voice. It was Cedric. He stood near the barrel entrance, Quidditch gloves tucked beneath one arm, his hair slightly windswept. "Are you okay, Rowan?" Cedric asked again, gentler this time. Rowan blinked quickly. "Yeah, fine. What are you doing up?" Cedric raised an eyebrow slightly. "Late Quidditch training. They've got us training extra for next year." Cedric gave Rowan a look. It was the kind of look that said he clearly didn't believe him. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. "You've seemed somewhere else recently." Behind Cedric, rain tapped quietly against the round windows. The fire shifted softly. For one horrible second, Rowan considered telling him. Not everything. Just enough. Enough for someone else to tell him this was a terrible idea. But then he thought about the chest, the key, the voice, and the words caught in his throat. Cedric stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. "Look," he said carefully, "whatever's going on, you don't have to carry it by yourself." That somehow made Rowan feel worse, because Cedric meant it. There was nothing suspicious or forced about him. Cedric just genuinely cared, in that effortless way Rowan still didn't fully understand. Rowan looked away toward the fire. I know. Cedric studied him quietly for another moment before his eyes drifted toward Rowan's cloak and shoes. Where are you going? Rowan's stomach tightened. Oh, nowhere. Cedric almost smiled faintly. That sounded incredibly convincing. Before Rowan could answer, footsteps echoed softly down the staircase. Margot appeared carrying her cloak over one arm and immediately slowed slightly upon seeing Cedric there. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Rowan, then back to Cedric. Evening, she said calmly. Cedric glanced between the two of them, and because Cedric Diggory was unfortunately very observant, his expression shifted almost instantly. You're both going somewhere. No, we're not, Rowan answered far too quickly. Cedric let out the faintest sigh through his nose. Rowan. There was no accusation in his voice now, just concern. Real concern. What are you doing? The common room suddenly felt very quiet. The fire cracked softly behind them. Rain whispered against the windows. For a moment nobody answered. Then Rowan said quietly, We're just going for a walk. Cedric looked at him for a long moment. After curfew? Yes. Are you trying to lose Hufflepuff house points? Rowan looked away slightly. Cedric rubbed tiredly at his forehead before lowering his hand again. When he spoke next, his voice was softer, more careful. You don't have to tell me what's going on, he said, but whatever decision you're about to make. His eyes met Rowan's properly then. Just make sure it's one you can live with afterward. The words hit harder than Rowan expected. Margot had gone completely still beside him. Cedric continued quietly. I know that look, all right? The one where someone's already half decided to do something dangerous before anyone can stop them. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I get it more than people think. Rowan swallowed slightly. Cedric glanced briefly toward the barrel entrance before lowering his voice. Just, he said quietly, searching for the right words. Be careful, all right? The room fell silent again. For one brief moment, Rowan almost told him everything. The room, the chest, the forest, the whispers. But then the image of the key flashed through his mind again, and he couldn't. Not yet. Finally, Rowan nodded once. I'll be careful. Cedric held his gaze for another second, as though trying to decide whether that was true. Then slowly, he stepped aside from the barrel entrance. Just come back in one piece, he said quietly. Margot gave the faintest nod. We will. Cedric glanced once more at Rowan, concern still lingering in his expression. Then finally he gave a small, tired smile. Good night, you two. And with that, he disappeared up the staircase toward the dormitories, leaving Rowan and Margot alone again beside the fire. Silence settled between them for a moment. Then quietly Margot said, He's worried about you. Yeah, Rowan admitted softly. And somehow, that made leaving harder. For a few seconds neither of them moved. The fire crackled quietly behind them while rain tapped softly against the windows. Beyond the round glass, the grounds of Hogwarts stretched dark beneath the night sky, waiting. Finally, Margot pulled her cloak tighter around herself. Well, she muttered, before I completely lose my mind and decide this is a terrible idea. Rowan nodded once. Together they slipped out through the barrel entrance and into the sleeping castle. By the time they reached the grounds, the rain had stopped completely. The forest stood waiting at the edge of the school beneath the moonlight, and somehow it looked far larger at night. The trees loomed endlessly beneath the moonlight, their branches twisting together like black veins against the sky. Mist drifted low across the ground, silver blue beneath the stars, and the darkness between the trunks seemed far deeper than darkness had any right to be. From the castle grounds, the forbidden forest had always looked distant, manageable, just another part of Hogwarts sitting quietly at the edge of the world. Standing before it now, Rowan realised how wrong that had been. The forest did not feel like part of Hogwarts at all. It felt ancient. Older than the castle. Older than the lake, like something that had been there long before wizards had ever decided to build towers beside it. Rowan and Margot carried the chest wrapped tightly beneath a cloak between them, each gripping one side awkwardly as they crossed the damp grass toward the tree line. Even through the thick fabric, Rowan could feel the chest humming faintly against his arms, not loudly, just enough to remind him it was awake. Behind them, Hogwarts glowed warmly against the mountainside, windows shining gold beneath the night sky. Ahead of them waited only shadow. For a long while neither of them spoke, only the soft rustle of grass beneath their shoes and the distant cry of an owl somewhere high above the grounds. Eventually Margot broke the silence. "We can still turn back." Rowan glanced sideways at her. Her voice wasn't teasing, wasn't sarcastic, just careful. He looked back toward the trees. "I know." But neither of them slowed down. A cold wind stirred across the grounds, carrying the scent of wet earth, moss, and something unfamiliar Rowan couldn't quite place. The closer they got to the trees, the more Rowan became aware of how loud the castle had been behind them. Because here, everything was quieter. No distant laughter from open windows, no clatter of moving staircases, no owls sweeping overhead. Even the night itself seemed to hold its breath near the forest. They reached the edge of the trees, and immediately the moonlight changed. The branches swallowed most of it whole, leaving only thin silver strands filtering weakly through the canopy above. The air turned colder beneath the trees, damp enough that Rowan could feel moisture gathering against his sleeves. Margot looked upward uneasily. The trees stretched impossibly high above them. Their trunks were enormous. Twisted roots burst through the earth like the ribs of something buried beneath the forest floor, and every shadow seemed to shift if Rowan looked at it for too long. Behind them, Hogwarts already felt far away. Rowan hesitated for the briefest second, then stepped forward. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. Everything inside felt muffled, hidden. Their footsteps sank softly into damp earth layered thick with fallen leaves and moss. Branches creaked somewhere high overhead, though Rowan couldn't feel any wind. Every so often something moved deeper between the trees, not close enough to see properly, but enough to remind them they were not alone in there. Margot's grip tightened slightly around her side of the chest. "I don't think students are supposed to come this deep into the forest," Rowan almost answered, then stopped. Somewhere far off in the darkness came a long, low cry. Not human, not quite animal either. The sound echoed faintly through the trees before disappearing again into silence. Margot looked toward the noise immediately, her face pale in the moonlight. Neither of them spoke after that. The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew denser, the shadows darker. Even the air itself felt heavier somehow, thick with the smell of damp bark and ancient things Rowan couldn't name. His heartbeat quickened, and with every step, the hum from the chest grew stronger. Not louder exactly, closer, as though whatever rested inside it knew where they were going. Rowan tightened his grip unconsciously, then quietly, "This way." Margot looked at him sharply. "How do you know?" Rowan frowned slightly, because the truth was, he didn't really know. He just did. The feeling pulled at him gently somewhere beneath his ribs, guiding him between the trees like an invisible thread. Left, past a fallen log thick with silver moss, right around a cluster of twisted roots, deeper, always deeper, until suddenly, the forest opened. The trees fell away into a wide clearing where pale moonlight spilled down through the branches in long silver beams. Mist drifted softly across the ground, glowing faintly beneath the stars overhead. Rowan stopped walking. Here, Margot looked around slowly. The clearing felt wrong somehow. Too still, too empty. As though the forest itself avoided this place. "Rowan," she said quietly. The chest vibrated faintly in Rowan's arms. The carvings along its surface shifted softly beneath the moonlight, twisting almost imperceptibly like something breathing beneath old wood. Slowly, carefully, the two of them knelt and lowered it onto the ground. The moment the chest touched the earth, the clearing fell silent, completely silent. Even the wind had stopped, the forest whispering softly to itself. Margot noticed it too. Her wand lifted slightly. "Rowan!" The chest hummed louder now, not just a sound anymore, a vibration. The earth beneath them seemed to tremble faintly with it, tiny ripples disturbing the layer of silver moonlight pooled across the clearing floor. The carvings etched into the chest shifted slowly beneath Rowan's fingers, moving, like something waking up. Rowan's pulse hammered painfully in his throat. Beside him, Margot took a cautious step backwards. "We should stop," she whispered. But Rowan barely heard her. The whispers inside his head had returned completely now, louder than ever. Not words exactly, just a pull, a feeling. "Open it." The old iron key trembled faintly in Rowan's hand as he lowered it toward the lock. For one brief second he hesitated. Then the lock clicked, and the forest seemed to exhale. A deep sound rolled through the trees around them, low and ancient, like the woods themselves had been holding their breath for centuries. The chest shuddered violently. Margot flinched backwards immediately, wand raised higher now. "Rowan!" The lid creaked open slowly. A blinding white light burst from inside. Not warm light. Cold. Brilliant. It poured across the clearing like liquid moonlight, flooding through the trees in glowing waves. Rowan threw an arm over his eyes as the brightness swallowed everything around him. The humming grew deafening. Then something rose from inside the chest. A sphere of light drifted upwards slowly into the air, perfectly smooth. Almost glass-like. Silver-white light swirled endlessly beneath its surface, as though stars themselves had been trapped inside it. Strange symbols flickered faintly within the orb before vanishing again too quickly to understand. It hovered before Rowan at eye level, breathing. That was the only way to describe it. The light pulsed slowly in and out like the steady rhythm of a living heartbeat. Margot stared at it in horror. "What is that?" But Rowan couldn't answer, because the moment he looked at the orb properly, it looked back. The clearing vanished. The forest vanished. For one terrifying second, Rowan felt impossibly small beneath something ancient and endless staring directly into him. Then the orb spoke like only he could hear. "When darkness stirs and the serpent wakes, two destinies shall walk the path fate takes. One crowned with glory, known by all, the other unheard when the shadows call. One bears the mark the world shall see, the other bears a weight none should keep. When shadow falls and the last choice lies, one will fall and the other shall rise. Bound by fate though names divide, the unnamed walks at glory's side." The final words echoed through the clearing, then silence crashed down all at once. The orb hovered motionless, waiting. Rowan stared at it, breathing hard. The clearing trembled. Leaves spiraled upward around them despite the complete absence of wind. The trees groaned softly in the darkness beyond the moonlight. Margot grabbed his sleeve suddenly. "Rowan," she said sharply, "something's wrong." But Rowan barely heard her. The orb had grown brighter now, violently bright. Something deep inside him twisted painfully. The whispers, the dreams, the pull he'd felt all year, all of it led here. Without fully understanding why. He reached out. "Rowan, don't—" Margot started, but it was too late. The moment his fingers touched the orb, it reacted violently. Light exploded outward in sharp, violent pulses. The sphere shook in the air, cracks racing wildly across its surface now like fractures through ice. The The clearing erupted with sound, roaring, rushing, like a storm tearing open above them. Margot stumbled backwards, shielding her face. "Rowan!" But Rowan couldn't let go. The orb dragged toward him almost desperately, the silver light wrapping around his arms and chest in spiralling ribbons, as though trying to force itself into him. Pain tore suddenly through his chest, white hot, unbearable. He cried out sharply as glowing cracks of light spread beneath his skin, near his collarbone like molten fractures. The orb pulsed faster, faster. The entire forest shook around them, branches bent violently overhead. The ground cracked beneath Rowan's knees. Then, the orb shattered, not like glass, like a star collapsing. A deafening blast of white gold light tore through the clearing with impossible force. Rowan felt himself thrown backward violently through the air before slamming hard against the ground. The breath vanished from his lungs instantly. Somewhere nearby, Margot screamed his name. The world dissolved into white light. Then blackness swallowed everything. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, voices. "He's hurt!" The voice sounded deep and distant, like something echoing through water. Another answered immediately, sharper this time. "He should not have come here." Something cold brushed against Rowan's face. Grass. Leaves. The smell of damp earth slowly returned around him. Pain followed a moment later, heavy and crushing beneath his ribs. "It is not our place to interfere," the sharper voice continued. "And yet," the calmer one replied, "we do not leave children to die in our forest." Rowan tried to open his eyes. Moonlight blurred above him through tangled branches. The world drifted in and out strangely, shapes stretching and bending every time he tried to focus. Dark figures moved nearby between the trees, tall and shifting against the silver light. Not human. He blinked hard. Everything swam again. Somewhere close beside him, Margot's voice broke through the haze. "Rowan?" Fear trembled beneath it. "Rowan, can you hear me?" He tried to answer. Nothing came out except a weak breath. The shadows nearby moved again. Large shapes. One stepped closer, and for a brief moment Rowan caught fragments instead of details. Dark hair, something like the shape of a bow across a shoulder, gold reflecting strangely in the moonlight. Then lower still, movement that didn't make sense. Too tall, too large. His vision blurred before he could understand it. "The forest felt it," said the sharper voice quietly now. "Something woke tonight." Margot looked between the shadows helplessly. "What was that thing?" she whispered. No one answered immediately. The air felt strange now, heavy, as though the clearing itself were still holding its breath after the explosion. Rowan forced his eyes open again. One of the figures stood over him now, impossibly still beneath the trees. He couldn't make out a proper face, only pale eyes catching silver in the dark as they studied him carefully. Not angry, not frightened, watching. "Whatever rested in that chest," the calmer voice said slowly, "should have remained buried." Another shape shifted somewhere deeper amongst the trees. The stars warned of change. "The stars warn of many things," the older voice replied calmly. The world tilted suddenly. For a horrible second, Rowan thought the ground itself had moved beneath him. Then he realized someone was lifting him. Strong. Margot said something sharply nearby, but Rowan couldn't follow the words anymore. His head pounded too badly. The whispers from the orb still echoed faintly inside his skull. "One will fall, and the other shall rise." Rowan squeezed his eyes shut weakly. The steady rhythm beneath him began moments later. Not footsteps. Something heavier, smoother, like thunder rolling through the earth. The forest drifted slowly above him now, as moonlight flickered between the branches overhead. Every now and then he caught glimpses of the strange shapes moving beside him through the trees, silent and enormous in the dark. But whenever he tried to properly focus on them, the darkness dragged him under again, The last thing Rowan heard before everything disappeared completely was Margot's voice somewhere nearby calling his name, and far behind them, the forest whispering softly to itself.